Story 1. It was our fourth real date, but we had been hanging out every day for a few months. We went to the fanciest restaurant in town, which she had specifically wanted to visit for a while. My dish was served with something advertised as a basil reduction, which was actually just pesto. I have a pine nut allergy, so I broke out in aggressive hives and my lips started to swell. Thankfully, I never went into anaphylaxis, but I still had to take a large dose of doxylamine, which hit me hard. She took everything in stride, even though we had to cancel the whole date. She took me back to her dorm room and monitored my symptoms while I faded in and out of sleep. I had realized I loved her a little while before that, but had not worked up the nerve to tell her because I had never fallen so hard so fast for someone, and it felt so sudden compared to my previous relationships. I apparently said something about it more than once while dozing in and out of sleep with my head in her lap. She is the only woman I have ever known who could turn a medical emergency into one of the most emotionally impactful romantic experiences of my life. Story 2. We were eating dinner, and I was pretty nervous since it was our first date. Our chemistry was great, and I didn't want to mess anything up. While we were in mid-conversation, I went to grab my water but ended up hitting it instead, and the entire glass of water spilled on his crotch. We hadn't even ordered our food yet. He just laughed it off. We went back to his house so he could change, and we decided to stay there and watch a movie. I was sitting on his hardwood floor picking out a DVD. He snuck up behind me, which scared me, and I accidentally farted. It was so loud because I was sitting on the hardwood floor. I'm surprised I didn't die of embarrassment. Anyway, we've been married for almost 12 years, and we still laugh about it. Story 3. I am a pale white man, and I went on a date with a woman who was black and Puerto Rican. She was very interested in white men, especially German men, and expressed a desire for me to essentially take the lead socially, for lack of a better term. For example, walking in front of her and ordering for her. I have always wanted to understand the origin of that mindset. She now lives in Germany. Story 4. We had a first date walking through Central Park. She showed me her tattoos in more intimate spots, which involved showing a little skin. We set a second date to meet for pizza. After work, we met up. I said I was starving. As we were walking to the pizza spot, she said she wanted to go into a tattoo parlor because she was thinking of getting another one. I agreed. She wanted to look at the art and get some ideas. Then, she sat down and said she wanted the word Esperanza written in large script down the entire length of her arm. The tattoo artist was wiping down her arm with alcohol. I asked if she was getting it then. Wouldn't it take like 2 hours? The tattoo artist said more. If this was a test, I had no intention of passing. It didn't seem worth arguing or discussing further, so I just walked out and had a wonderful solo pizza slice. I'm a reasonably patient gentleman willing to compromise in life, but first you must feed me. Story 5. After we had spoken about how I did not like it, she decided to show me her bag of bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism items. I am talking about whips, gag balls, the whole 9 yards, and an unsolicited picture of her ex's penis in a chastity cage. At the end of the date, she grabbed my phone and did not want to give it back because of the power dynamic, since she was into dominating. It was only when I started shouting that I was going to call the police that she backed off and handed me my phone. This was the first and last date. Story 6. On a blind date. In the middle of the date, she told me she injured her ex-partner because she was very dry. I guess she was just saying we needed to use lubricant. I did not know, so I was not risking it. Story 7. Met online and he seemed totally normal. The first time meeting in person, he had a couple of beers and started quacking like a duck. No more words, just quacking. Story 8. He asked me out. I told him I appreciated the offer, but that money was tight and I couldn't afford it right now. He said he would pay. I said no, I prefer to pay for myself. I don't want him to have something to hold over my head. And it was a point of pride for me. He insisted several times. I kept protesting, but in the end, I gave in, young and inexperienced, and agreed to a drink. He got a beer, I got a beer. This was about a decade ago, so the total wasn't more than $10 including tip. Ultimately, we weren't a match. I didn't care for his humor or find him attractive. He wasn't very interesting, and I wasn't a fan of how we even got on the date. I said I appreciated him taking me out, but I didn't feel a connection and wished him well. Then he tried to say I owed him sex because he bought me drinks. This was exactly what I told him I did not want to happen from the beginning. He did that. I immediately called him out on it and offered to pay him back. He declined, saying I could just pay him back with sex. I said no, and he threw a tantrum, so I stopped responding. He contacted me a few years later on a different number and asked why we never worked out. I brought up the incident, and he said he didn't remember it and that I must be thinking of someone else. Then he tried to get me to go out with him for a few years after that. Some people. Story 9. A lifetime ago, I had some mild chemistry with a coworker, and another coworker encouraged us to go out together. She was proud of her microwave cooking skills, but I didn't know that. I don't know how our conversation went on to the topic, but we talked about cooking, and I said something like, I can microwave meals, but that doesn't really count. The night went downhill from there. She left in tears, and I felt terrible. Years later, she moved to the same town as me and met another guy, an acquaintance I happened to know through Pokemon Go, and recently they got engaged. I'm genuinely happy for both of them. But that really bad night that led to us breaking up will always haunt me as a dude. Watch what you say moment. Story 10. She passed gas while we were eating sushi. I tried to outdo her and accidentally soiled myself. This happened a few months ago, and we have been together for almost 2 years. Story 11. My current girlfriend on our second date said to me, I see you want to kiss me, so just go for it. I still smile at that almost 2 years later. Story 12. I had the shortest date. The man came to the place we decided to meet, saw me and said, I thought you would be much thinner. I sat in the car. 15 minutes later, he parked at a gas station and went to get a cup of tea. I got out and bought an energy drink. Then he dropped me off near my house. We both paid for our own drinks and spoke very little during the drive. Story 13. I went out with a woman for a daytime coffee date to ensure her comfort and safety. She arrived with her 1-year-old son and, at the end of the meeting, asked me if she could borrow 20 pounds from me. Story 14. Picked the girl up, and on the way to dinner, she asked if we could make a couple of stops. It was a little weird. At the first stop, I figured she had a friend she wanted to talk to before we went on. At the second stop, I realized she was selling drugs. I took her back home. She was angry, as if I was the one who made the evening strange. Story 15. My favorite story is not mine but a friend of my wife's. A man took her to a nice steak restaurant for dinner. When her steak arrived, he stood up without saying a word, came up behind her chair, grabbed her knife and fork, and started cutting her meat for her. The way she tells the story of how she sat there awkwardly while people at other tables watched this unfold is one of the funniest stories I have ever heard. Story 16. I had a man show me not only where he had been stabbed in the stomach, but also where someone had tried to put a meat cleaver through his ankle. My only thought was, you must be so annoying. And my only comment was, oh well, third time lucky. Story 17. I went on a first date with a girl who convinced me to try bowling with my non-dominant arm. I ended up seeing the chiropractor longer than I saw the girl. Story 18. I met a girl in a bar for our first date. As soon as we walked in, I noticed my father in the corner with his friends. My father is a bit of a joker, and I remember trying to signal for him to leave us alone and let me enjoy my time. I had just sat down for a drink with this girl when my father, in true fashion, came over to introduce himself and embarrass me. Looking back, it was quite funny, but it was not at the time. Story 19. I went on one date with a man from South America. He had a very thick accent and was a little hard to understand. As we were walking into the restaurant and I was about to go through the door, he said, I like your butts. I was a little taken aback by how forward he was. To lighten the mood, I glanced backward and said, pretty good, huh? He looked at me completely straight-faced and said, I like your butts. He was complimenting my boots. Story 20. It was my first date in years after having my daughter. We went to a nice Korean barbecue place for dinner that I had never been to. For food, I wanted something easy that would not make a mess. So I ordered the chicken and a side of vegetables. Turned out I ordered a whole rotisserie chicken. It was such a big deal that the chef personally brought it out to our table. The presentation had the entire restaurant watching in awe. They placed the whole chicken right in front of me while my date had a humble salad in front of him. I will always remember leaving that date with leftovers for a family of 4. Story 21. I met a man on an online dating site and went on 3 dates with him. I am a 19 to 20-year-old female, impressionable and honestly just naive. I don't quite remember the first 2 dates, but on the third, I knew I needed to tell him it wasn't working out. He picked me up from my house, and we drove 30 to 40 minutes to a pool hall and bar type of place. The pool tables on the lower level were for those under 21, and the tables upstairs were for drinking. He got upset with me because I couldn't go to the upstairs area where the better tables were, even though he knew I was not of legal drinking age. While we played a round or two, I told him that these past few dates had been nice, but I wanted to be just friends, not romantic. He lost control in public in the middle of the day. First he was calm, but his tone changed. Then he began throwing things down hard, getting angry, insulting me while still calling me pet names. He said I was the girl for him and that no one else could have me. He started crying and became enraged. Then he grabbed my arm and dragged me down to the beachfront, where he punched a brick wall until his fist was bloody. He was flailing and hysterical, while I just stood there, scared to run away. We were on sand, and I didn't know how fast I could get away from him. He was in the military, so I figured he could overpower me. I tried to calm him down. People were walking by and staring but not intervening. I don't blame them. I don't remember what happened next, but somehow this date ended with him driving me back home, which was incredibly foolish of me. This was before ride-sharing services existed, and text messaging still cost 10 cents per message unless you had an unlimited plan. I could have called literally anyone else, but I don't remember why I didn't. For some reason, I let this unstable man drive me home. Speed limits meant nothing to him. He was driving over 100 miles per hour on the freeway. He was still crying, punching the roof of his car, then spitting at me, apologizing, trying to touch me inappropriately, and hitting me when I pushed him away. He was weaving in and out of traffic. All I could think was that this was where I would die, that he would crash into the center divide and kill us both because I was breaking up with him, even though we weren't even officially together. Somehow I made it home. He dropped me off and shoved me out of his vehicle. I was bruised and covered in his blood, but I was alive. I received over 500 texts from him before I finally blocked his number. I never went on another date from that online dating site again. Story 22. Not me, but a friend went on a date, and during the meal her ex turned up and started making threats to both of them. Apparently, he did not accept that she had broken up with him as he had been very abusive to her. She was trying to move on, but he was stalking her. The threats at the restaurant got so bad that the staff let my friend and his date out through the back of the kitchen to give the ex the slip. Story 23. Being told I was an idiot for opposing the Iraq War. She was dropped off at her dorm, and I never talked to her again. She still stalked me for months afterward. I don't understand it either. Story 24. A friend of mine jumped off a low wall while walking to meet his date and broke his ankle. It was a bad first date impression. Story 25. He wore a complete Spider-Man themed outfit, hat, shirt, and pants. It would not have been my first choice for making a first impression. Story 26. She had a genuine emergency call. I thought it was just the standard call to get out of the date if it was not going well, but she got in touch 2 days later to rearrange. We dated for a few weeks, but nothing came of it. Story 27. We went for a 2-hour walk, just talking a lot. It was our second date. We had met offline in a coffee shop where he had struck up a conversation and asked me for my number. We were supposed to go to a coffee shop afterward to have a bite to eat and some coffee. He said he had forgotten his wallet but lived just around the corner. We went to his house. I made the mistake of walking in because I felt uncomfortable standing in front of the door, and he had asked me to come in. He immediately slammed the door shut and tried to assault me. Story 28. Had a horrible date with a girl, but she asked me to stay the night afterward. Her mom immediately greeted me without any surprise and asked me to fix a light switch box, which I did. I was confused but figured I had passed whatever weird test this was. Upstairs, she showed me her closet, went through every article of clothing, and told me the price, discount, and how she got it. Then she suddenly broke down in tears, screaming because she thought her friend stole a perfume bottle. She insisted that I help move her furniture to look for it under the bed and behind the cabinets, using a flashlight and crawling. She put on an awful movie like Cube 2, Hypercube, to calm herself down and asked for a back rub. I delivered and did a good job. Then I tried to progress things, but she declined. I respected it and gently attempted once or twice more, but she kept asking for more back rub. The movie ended, my arms were tired, and she put on the last of the Mohicans. She wanted more back rub. I attempted and got a Charlie horse in my shoulder. She made a move on me, but I still couldn't move my arm. I manually took care of her 3 times with my other hand. She told me I could take care of myself in the bathroom she apparently shared with her mom, but I declined. She then told me that she had 2 exorcisms as a child but can still see people's auras and their future ghosts. She told me about mine. I apparently have ghosts, and I was confused and scared. So I stayed awake for the rest of the night because I didn't want to get axe murdered but wanted to leave on amicable terms. Her mom woke her up while I was still asleep and asked if I wanted to go to breakfast with them and their very close friends. I declined with both kidneys intact. Story 29. I went on a date with a girl who literally lost her mind at the club where we met. She said she had to look good since the ex-wife of a famous local rapper was there. I left, and she texted me saying I embarrassed her in front of the ex-wife and that I was a red flag. Story 30. She took her hands off the steering wheel while driving, waved them around mockingly, and said, "What? Do you think I am going to do something crazy? I know there is much more to the story, but this was the definitive moment." Story 31. When I was at university, I was infatuated with a beautiful Pizza Hut waitress. I left my number with the tip, and to my astonishment, she called back and we arranged a date. We met at a quiet bar and started talking. From there, things became a bit awkward. She was a Belgian national, a third-generation Marxist who disliked students and the military-industrial complex. I was a student studying war and was not a Marxist. Ironically, once we got past the first 15 minutes of awkwardness, we became a bit tipsy, had a good argument, and then went our separate ways. Story 32. Way back when I was in high school, I took a crush out on a date. We had lunch, then went thrifting. When we got to Goodwill, there was an English pit bull in a car. We were standing there talking about it. This was in Arizona, and we were discussing what to do when, out of nowhere, the dog squeezed out the window, chased us into Goodwill, barking at us. Her reaction was hilarious, as was mine. We ran for a bit inside, turned down an aisle, and the dog stopped following. We found its owner inside, and the dog calmed down. Story 33. When we just started dating, we went to a restaurant where we did not know my wife's high school bully worked. She was in a different section of the restaurant, so we did not interact, but they both recognized each other. As we were leaving, she tried to spill coffee on my wife but failed and spilled it on herself. She then rushed to the kitchen without saying a word. Story 34. While having coffee outdoors, she waved at 3 men who walked past. She told me she had slept with them but assured me they had never dated. She borrowed a cigarette from the 3rd man. Story 35. Once, on a date, the waiter spilled an entire tray of drinks on me. It was awkward, but it somehow broke the ice and made the evening memorable. Story 36. Second time ever seeing my soon-to-be fiancée. I got out of work at 7 a.m. and drove 3 hours to see her at her place. I thought we'd grab breakfast and I would squeeze in a nap, but instead we had sex and then she taught me how to drift a 4-wheeler on some land behind her house. Then someone who worked for the town showed up, so we had to hurry back to her place, tuck the 4-wheeler in the shed, and run inside. I did not nap. Story 37. I'm going to change it up from your horror stories. I went on a date to a Chinese restaurant. We hit it off right away. Afterward, I went to her house where we spent about 6 hours together with no breaks. I fell asleep at her place and was invited over repeatedly. Eventually, I was invited to live with her. Now, we are happily married with 3 children and a 4th on the way. Story 38. We were sitting having a chat. I put my arm around her and leaned in to kiss her cheek. As I kissed her cheek, I sneezed at the exact same time. I apologized profusely. We have been married for 10 years now. Story 39. Met online and went to have dinner. I asked what he did for work, and he said he was unemployed because he had been fired from his job for doing thong checks on the female servers. Story 40. It was a blind date. We went to a karaoke bar. He got drunk and sang very badly, while I tried to sink down in my chair so no one knew I was with him. He made his way over to me, started singing to me, caressed my cheek, and put his fingers under my chin. I was dying of embarrassment. Luckily, he got so wasted he had to get a ride home. I was not letting him in my car to vomit. He did not drive there, and I would not have let him drive home if he had. Story 41. My boyfriend met a girl online through a dating app. She looked pretty and said she was an auto mechanic. They planned to go camping, so he bought a new tent and camping gear and drove about 2 hours to meet her. When he arrived, her hair was greasy and tied up in a bun. She was wearing shorts and a tank top and had her 2 children in the back seat, one of them just in a diaper. He got in her car, and she was drinking and driving, speeding down gravel roads. One of the windows was broken and covered with a trash bag. They passed a house that looked abandoned, and she said, "There goes my parents' house." Then she told him her ex's house was up the road, but she was not allowed within 500 feet of him because she had threatened him with a screwdriver. They passed some men sitting by a bonfire, and she said she had to stop and say hi. She left him in the car with her children for about 20 minutes and returned with half a bottle of whiskey, telling him she had just drunk it all. He asked to drive, and she let him. While he was driving, she told him to stop driving like a coward. When they reached the campground, he had to use the bathroom. When he came back, she told him she had to use the bathroom earlier, but there was no toilet paper. They sat around a campfire, and he noticed her repeatedly digging hard at one of her legs. He said it looked like she had scabies on her leg. This is seriously one of the funniest online date stories I have ever heard. Story 42. My current boyfriend, during our second date, brought me not just flowers arranged in my favorite colors, but also drew a picture of me, printed it out on photo paper, wrote the day we met on the back, and used it to tie the bouquet together. When I later told him that was the first time someone had ever gifted me flowers, he genuinely said, "But that's normal." I knew then and there that I didn't want to let him go. Story 43. I went on a date with a man who listed himself as 5 feet 7 inches on his profile. I am 5 feet 6 inches and have no issues with height. I have dated people 5 feet 2 inches and taller before. On the day of the date, the man messaged and asked what shoes I would be wearing. I said boots, and he replied, "Okay, just checking." When we met, it was clear that the 5 feet 7 inches was a generous estimate. I did not mention it and assumed it was something he might be insecure about, so I carried on with the date. He was indeed insecure. He spent most of the date insisting he was 5 feet 7 inches, and talked about how many of the women he had dated were well over 6 feet without heels, and that it did not bother him at all. Unbelievably, I endured all of this and gave him chance after chance to drop the subject. Eventually, he moved on, only to tell me about his last girlfriend, how they broke up in a bookstore, and that his last interaction with her was throwing a book at her before leaving. I can deal with insecurity, but flying books in public I cannot. There was no second date. Story 44. I met him online. He seemed nice and told me how he was putting his life together. It made sense since I was in college and doing the same. I was giving him a ride home from our third date when he suddenly asked, "Did you ever search me online?" My heart sank, but I tried not to show any emotion. I clearly remember it was dark, and I was ready to escape if he tried anything. He admitted that he was a sex offender for something that happened years ago. The reality was that he had just gotten out of prison. He had date raped a woman and was apparently with a group that had been charged. The entire situation made me sick to my stomach, but I calmly dropped him off and said goodnight as usual. The next day, I ended it via text. For some reason, he didn't understand why. Story 45. I was in high school and this date was doomed from the start. I picked her up to go see the Baz Luhrmann production of Romeo and Juliet. As we were driving, a rabbit jumped into the road, and I hit it. Then, when we went to sit in our row at the theater, we happened to sit in the same row as her ex-boyfriend, whom I did not know she had dated. Story 46. My new wife and I sat down for dinner at a local restaurant and ordered some food. After the server walked away, she said, "I don't think this is what I want." I said, "Oh, sorry. Did you want to leave and get different food?" "No." She got up and left. I had no idea where she went until the server came and told me she got into a car and left. I walked back to our apartment to find all her belongings gone and annulment papers on the kitchen table. Her mother had cleaned things out and took her back home. Pro tip: don't marry someone you met on a blind date and have known for only a month before getting married at a truck stop chapel in Lincoln. Story 47. It wasn't technically on the date, but after. We set up a date for Saturday, but my friend's birthday party is after he gets off work at 10:30. It's just 3 guys and my friend's wife playing Magic. The gathering, so I tell her I have plenty of time to go to dinner, but I have plans after my friend gets off work. Dinner is awful. She doesn't really talk and is on her phone the whole time. I pay, we go our separate ways, and I go down to hang out with my friend's wife and our other friend until he gets off work. It's about a 40-minute drive. I'm not a texter and driver, and I'm in a couple of group chats, so I don't think much of my phone going off. I'll deal with it when I get there. When I get there, I have 17 missed calls and 32 texts from her. They start off innocuous enough. "I had a great time. Thanks for dinner. Sorry I was super awkward." Somewhere in there, she tells me she loves me and can't wait to have my kids. By the end, it's just, "I'm sorry and please answer me." Texts. Story 48. I took a Tinder match to a race one time on our first date. We have a paved short track in the area, and we went to watch the Friday night races. $12 tickets, and we could bring our own beer. Stadium hot dogs and hamburgers for dinner, and we watched some great racing all night. When we arrived, they were holding the kids' go-kart league, and she thought the kids were so cute in their little racing suits. A couple of drivers had small bows on their helmets. We shared a quick moment in the car at the end of the night when I took her home, but other than that, it didn't go anywhere. That one date was definitely the best first date I've ever been on. Story 49. This was a second date, but it was just meant to be chill. I invited him to my apartment after I got off work. He didn't work that day, so he chose to go for a long walk to get to mine. I was shocked he wanted to walk because it's like a 40-minute drive on a normal day. Took him about 5 hours to walk to my place. We met at a restaurant, and he said he just wanted to get something to go and eat it at my place. He offered to get me something, but I said no. I was expecting him to get something like a burger that holds well for takeout. He wanted nachos. Even the waitress taking his order said they don't really make nachos to go because they don't sit well. He ordered them anyway. Back at my place, I went to shower and told him to make himself comfortable. When I got out of the shower, he was on my bed, shirt off, sweatpants on, watching Desperate Housewives on his phone while munching on the already congealed nachos. He had the strongest body odor. He didn't put on any deodorant or ask to shower. I was really shocked. I asked if he wanted to watch on my TV, and he said no, his phone was fine. I tried to offer something else, but he just wanted to watch Desperate Housewives on his phone for the rest of the night. In hindsight, I should have kicked him out because I got a major ick, but this was the first guy I was seeing after a 6-year relationship. I forgot how to act. Story 50. I met a guy online years ago, and after a few days of talking, we decided to meet up in the city for a festival. He was attractive, charming, and a perfect gentleman for most of the day. He even met up with a couple of my friends, bought them drinks, and seemed like he wanted to impress them. Felt like he was really into me. The moment we were alone together, he whispered in my ear, "Do you want to feel how big my penis is?" I said, "No thank you, not right now." But he grabbed my hand and physically forced it down his pants. I balled my hand into a fist and tried to pull back, but he was a lot stronger than me. I yelled to my friends, and we ended up leaving him alone at the festival. I never talked to him again. He did have a large penis, but that was beside the point. Story 51. The first time my ex met my daughter was on a group date playing paintball, and it went very well. We all had fun, they got along, and his group of friends and their significant others made it an enjoyable experience. I think being included with the adults as a 14-year-old was an important part of those two having a good relationship. He was definitely the best person I ever dated as a single mother. It was a classic case of right person, wrong time. Story 52. I went on a coffee date with one of my high school crushes about 10 years after we graduated. We sat down, and then she told me she needed to leave to bleach her skin. The date ended quickly after that, but she successfully got her free coffee. Story 53. I was flirting with a very free-spirited coworker who was moving to Mexico for a year. 3 weeks before her departure, we went for a beer, and by the third drink, we were in my apartment. When we were getting ready to sleep, she told me, "You can kiss me if you want." Hearing someone say that out loud after many straightforward relationships really surprised me. We continued seeing each other until she left for Mexico. It was the best experience of my life. Story 54. I have a really good memory of the time when I dated who I consider to be the most beautiful girl I have ever seen in person, especially of what led to the first and second times we slept together, but it is really too long to type. We managed to see each other about 10 times or so, and unfortunately she had many things she needed to work on by herself, so we stopped dating very early. However, it was really intense, and I remember I could not stop looking into her eyes. On one of the last dates we had, and we both were aware it was likely one of the last times we would see each other, she looked at me intensely and told me, "I do not understand how I can feel so good with you when I am with you, but at the same time not care at all about you when we are not together." To this day, 6 years later, I still do not know how to feel about that sentence. I just hope she managed to get her life together and that she has found happiness. She was not really in a good place when we met. Story 55. Imagine me sitting at a high-top table across from my date. My purse is on the table with the long shoulder strap hanging down directly in front of me. I crossed my legs, my foot caught the strap, and my purse slammed into my chest. It only lasted a second, and I grabbed it and tried to gracefully recover. It is just a little thing, but I still think of it 35 years later. What a dumb, clumsy thing to happen. Story 56. I went on a date with a woman. After I dropped her off, I ended up sleeping with her mother. I mostly gave consent. Story 57. Receiving a hand stimulation under the table when some of my wife's friends see us and stop to talk while they wait for more of their friends. I shake hands and explain why I am sweating. I just tell them that I am hot, so I remove my jacket to maintain the pretense. Trying to keep a straight face, I grip my wife's thigh so hard that I rip her leggings and leave some scratches. The hand stimulation is very tense and slow. Story 58. After I split up with my ex-wife because she was abusive, I had a coffee date with a woman who was a nurse. Halfway through, she talked about the last man she was with. She mentioned that he angered her and she would slap him, let the air out of his tires, and take a baseball bat to his car windows. I left quickly. Story 59. Typical teenage date. We went deep into the woods to smoke some marijuana. I don't know if it was my anxiety, the setting, or the bad combination of a Monster energy drink and McDonald's nuggets, but I had a severe green out. I was sobbing and non-stop projectile vomiting fluorescent green-brown slime. I was basically incoherent. My face was covered in mucus from crying so hard, and there were sticks and mud in my hair from hitting the ground trying unsuccessfully to contain my vomit. I was inconsolable and thought I was dying. I kept begging my new boyfriend to leave me there because I didn't want him to see that. I would have rather died in the woods alone or eventually made my way back myself at night than have him witness it. This kid refused to leave and stayed with me for probably over 3 hours. He witnessed my entire mental breakdown and the vomit sob cycle. He eventually walked me home when I was steady enough to stand. Story 60. I had a crush on a man when I was 20 years old. He was 8 years older than me. I had never dated anyone before, but somehow I found the courage to ask him out. We went on a date, movie, and dinner, and everything was great. After dinner, we sat in his car. He asked me, "How much do you know about me?" I said something like, "You are nice and kind." Then he told me he had slept with many women, some of whom he barely knew. He did it for fun. I did not expect that. We talked for hours, mostly him sharing about his life and family. At the end of the night, he said we would not contact each other again. He said I needed to find someone who was actually nice and kind. Basically, he agreed to go on a date with me just to tell me this. Story 61. I was taken out on 2 dates while visiting Australia for 2.5 weeks. He took me first to a local museum in Sydney near Hyde Park, and we saw an evening showing of the Red Shoes. Afterwards, we got some ice cream and walked around the city together. The next week, he had driven us to Canberra to visit Parliament House, eat at a local bakery with excellent pastries, and visit another art museum as I enjoy art. We met up with his friends at a cafe, then went back to our hotel room and cooked together. We had kangaroo kebabs with sweet potatoes and pan-fried Brussels sprouts. These 2 experiences were some of my fondest memories, even though we did not last. Story 62. A guy took me to a Greek restaurant, and our server was partnering with a younger server with special needs, showing him the ropes. How to clean the table, how to serve a few dishes. He was amazing. Not only was the main server patient, but the pair together was really lovely and super efficient. I love seeing that kind of kindness. When the bill came, I offered to split it, but my date insisted on paying. I accepted, but as we were getting up to leave, the server came to clean up and pick up the bill. He looked at it, his eyes widened, and he told my date, "Are you kidding me? Come on. That's so nuts." He also looked at me incredulously, like, "Oh my God, you're with this guy." I can only assume my date gave them next to nothing, if anything, as a tip. My date shrugged it off, smirked, and just walked away. I thought the whole thing was really off and pretty horrible, so I stayed behind for a minute and put about $40 on the table to thank them and apologize. This was 20 years ago. I never had a second date. Clearly, that dude was a major jerk. Story 63. I wore a leather jacket. She had a People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals sticker on her shirt. I think that was the first time young me ever paid that much attention to a romantic comedy and avoided a kiss at the end of the night. Story 64. Attended a wedding with some coworkers and had a few kisses and some action with one of them. She got quite intoxicated. We went back to her apartment around 3 a.m. Some of her rooms she rented out. As soon as we got there, I didn't even take my shoes off before she drunkenly barged in on her tenants, who were sleeping, urging them to join our party. I stopped and decided that it wasn't worth it and started to leave. She noticed, caught up to me outside her door, and begged me to stay. Among her arguments, which she presented loudly for the whole building to hear, she even offered me oral sex while her tenants were slowly getting up. I apologized to her tenants and told her I'd call in the morning. I called her. She had no recollection of the events and had no idea why her tenants were threatening to move out. We worked together a few months after, but nothing else happened between us. Story 65. I was visiting Puerto Rico for the first time and met a woman there. We went to Wendy's on our first date together. The whole day was our date. After ordering, I got the wrong flavor Frosty. I said I was okay with it and it was not a big deal and that I would settle for it. But she immediately took the Frosty from my hand, went straight to the counter, and started speaking firmly in Spanish to the woman behind the counter. I did not know Spanish at the time. She got me the Frosty I asked for while having the biggest grin on her face, as if she had handled business for her man. Both the action and the look on her face showed me a kind of love I will never forget. Story 66. The guy had to have been out of his previous relationship for months and told me he was ready to start dating again. Keep in mind, this guy is a huge gym enthusiast. Every time we were texting, it seemed like he was at the gym. We were on our way to our second date at the movies, and I had a claw clip in so I couldn't comfortably lean my head back. At one point, I rested my head on his shoulder as a cute gesture. After the movie, he acted strangely toward me. When I got home, he sent me a picture of himself at the gym, saying he needed to work out his feelings and that me resting my head on his shoulder was too much for him. We stopped talking and only maintained a streak after that. A few months later, as if I had not gotten the idea that we weren't going to be a thing, He texted me on my birthday saying he wasn't ready for anything, then added, "Happy birthday though. So weird." Story 67. I paid on the first date, she paid on the second date, then we left without paying on the third date. I returned the following day to pay for everything and left a generous tip. I also informed my friend who worked at the restaurant that I would leave without paying and come back to pay later. I worked at this restaurant for 10 years, so they knew me. Story 68. On a date with an attractive Irish girl in the mid-1990s, we somehow got onto the subject of the Irish Republican Army. She started to talk about how much she and her family supported the freedom fighters who were fighting against the English invaders, and they even knew some of them. I quickly finished my drink and ended the evening. It was a little too dangerous for my liking. Story 69. I went on a double date, and the other girl was more interested in me than my date. We started talking a few days after that date. 8 years later, I found out she had cheated on me with several men, including her boss. Story 70. Went to the movies as a young teenager with a young man. During the show, the young man kissed the top of my head, and somehow his dental braces got caught in my hair. It was very funny to me, but the young man was mortified. Story 71. It was after our first date. I was dropping her off at her house. My mind was racing a million miles an hour, replaying everything we did, trying to figure out if I was cool or said anything stupid. Right as that was happening, she said, "This is the part where you give me a kiss. We have been together for 6 months now." Story 72. The man proceeds to pick the garnish off his plate while saying, "Why did they give me this? I did not order vegetables." He was dead serious. Also, not eating vegetables as a grown man. Story 73. First date. Met her for sushi. After an hour of getting to know each other, she said, "So, your car or mine?" What? She wanted to have sex in the parking lot. I was in the military at the time, and a public indecency charge would have seriously messed up my career. I was so shocked at how matter-of-factly she asked that. Story 74. When I was first dating my husband, I went to his house for dinner and a movie. When it was time for me to leave, I was saying goodbye to him in the driveway. While we were both embraced, he suddenly said, "What the hell?" I turned around and saw a huge bear watching us from the other end of the driveway. I ran inside. My future husband decided to follow the bear with his camera as it ran back to a nearby creek. He took some photos too. I guess that bear also wanted a hug. Story 75. On our third or fourth date, he was charming and fun, but we did not know each other very well. He was pulled over while driving me home. I assumed it was for a tail light or something minor. He was taken out of the car and brought away to talk, while another officer asked me a few questions about how I knew him and if I would be willing to take his car back to his house. He was arrested right there, but I was not told why. I dropped his car off, put the keys in his mailbox, and took a ride home. I did not see him again. Later, I found out through public records that he had threatened to harm his wife and children. Story 76. I was with a girl on our first meeting, drinking wine. There was a somewhat strange man, older, around his late 30s, wearing one of those jackets professors wear, but a more relaxed one. He was sitting alone, and at one point, he came to us and said we fit perfectly together and wondered how long we had been together. On the spot, I made up a story that we had been together for 8 years and were getting married soon. He commented that he knew it was something like that. Then I admitted that I had just made it up and had known her for only 30 minutes. He was very shocked. I believed every word. "You are a good actor. Be careful of him. Lies don't mean anything to him." Afterwards, he went back to his place. He kept drinking and watching me. At some point, he whispered from 2 tables away, "Psychopath." Story 77. She chewed with her mouth open during the full conversation and took bites mid-sentence. It was too much to overcome, and I tried hard not to let it bother me. I saw the partially chewed food many times. I stopped contacting her. I hope she found happiness. Story 78. We did a fun 5-hour-long hike for our second date. We got lost and couldn't find our way back. It started raining. My phone ran out of battery, and we started to panic a little. She pulled out a large taser and turned on a light. We both laughed at the idea that she got lost on a hike with a guy she barely knew and had to use her taser. It was a great relationship that lasted 8 months but ended due to a lack of compatibility. We even had a breakup date where we got drunk, ate sushi, hugged, and never saw each other again. Story 79. When I first read the title, I thought you wanted me to answer with a date like January 4th or March 18th, not a date as in being with someone. I will just go back to sleep. Story 80. Went on a date with this guy I liked in high school to a play. He saw his friend there in the audience and decided to sit with her the whole time, while I sat by myself. I was so embarrassed. Story 81. It happened in 2008, maybe. We were on our first date when his brother called to tell him their mother had died. We dated for a while after that, but things fizzled out naturally. He was a nice guy, and I hope life has treated him well. Story 82. I went out with a girl once and it was just kind of off. We had similar interests and could talk to each other, but every answer just didn't quite land. She liked Shakespeare, so I said I loved Macbeth, but she thought that one was overrated. She said she liked stand-up comedy, but none of the comedians I knew. I asked if she was a foodie. She loved Indian food. I have bad acid reflux, so I can't really eat spicy food. And so on. After a walk around the park, she invited me back to her place and we chatted a bit. It was clear this probably wasn't going anywhere, so I was getting ready to excuse myself when she started making out with me. I distinctly remember her initiating because I could tell the vibe was too off for me to try anything. Then she unbuckled my pants, got on her knees, and gave me oral sex to completion. No dirty talk. No asking what I liked. No moans or sounds of pleasure from her. Just a very businesslike action. It was not the best I've ever had, but far from the worst. Since I was younger, I came in pretty short order. Afterwards, I asked if I could reciprocate or if we could get into bed, but she said, "No, thank you." It was clear she was excusing me, so I left and we never talked again. I still have no idea what she was thinking. Whether she liked me and thought this was an appropriate reward for being a nice guy but then changed her mind, whether she thought it is just what you do as a woman at the end of a date, or whether she had some kind of oral fixation and that was all she wanted. I suppose, all in all, it was the nicest brush-off I ever got from a woman, but it felt weirdly transactional. The lesson I absorbed was that sometimes, if you are polite and friendly and have a penis, occasionally a woman will perform oral sex to get you out of her apartment. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.